Last time we had these readings about 3 years ago, I preached about the gospel. So this year, this week, this season, cycle, I'm going to preach about something else. It's sort of a John Denver sort of theme, you know, Rocky Mountain High and country roads and sunshine on your shoulder and burning bushes. I love the old Bible stories, especially those Old Testament stories, you know, like Adam and Eve and Abraham and Sarah and Moses, and because they're so earthy and natural with dirt and mountains and sun and earth and wind and fire. Not to be confused with the musical group of the 70s. This earthiness, it speaks to me, and I'm sure it speaks to you too, especially if you've ever worked in a garden and gotten dirt under your fingernails, or maybe you're camping this weekend, or you're on the water on your pontoon, or maybe you're just playing lawn darts this weekend. It speaks to us. Moses taking off his sandals, and he finds God in this bush that won't burn. Doesn't get any more natural than that. I've shared with some of you, I've started a new, I guess you call it a diet. I like to call it the 4 elements lifestyle. I drink twice as much water as I used to every day. And I gaze at the sun each morning. That's how plants get their energy too. And I practice intentional breathing, which helps oxygen flow easier through my bloodstream. Water, sun, breath. Oh yeah, and I eat a bowl of dirt every day. Every day I walk barefoot. I walk barefoot and I feel the soil on my feet. The soil is alive with organisms and energy. It was Carl Jung who said, "When you walk with naked feet, how can you ever forget the earth?" So there you have it, the 4-element lifestyle. Sound like a hippie, don't I? But for me to find harmony and balance, I have to attempt to connect to the natural elements of my environment, to deliberately leave all the craziness that this world can dump on us, you know, the news and the politics and what Taylor Swift is wearing, and to discover God in the smallest and ordinary things. God is on every page, as I told the kids this morning. Every lungful of air God gives my body. Every gaze of sunshine, every gulp of cool water, every smudge of dirt between my toes, these moments can, if we learn to let them, give life to our souls. God is everywhere. Which brings me to plants and the bush that did not burn up. I can't help think but about after our time in Canada, where I went to seminary. We were there for 3 years. Christy and I packed up everything we owned into a U-Haul truck, and we headed back to America. And I mean, we had every square inch of that truck packed full of stuff, our stuff. And I remember we were so homesick. It was so great to get back into America. I've never felt so patriotic in my life. And we got to the border at Sarnia, the Canadian-American border, and the guard, he came out, and I showed him our papers, you know, and I gave him the inventory list that they wanted. And as they walked around the truck, the guard asked us a lot of questions, and he stared at us a lot, you know, while we answered. With the list in his hand, the guard then said to me, "Tell me you don't have houseplants in this truck." So I did what I was told. I said, "I don't have houseplants in this truck." Of course, we had every plant, bush, and shrub we owned back there. But I figured I'd ask for forgiveness when I got back to the States. And he said, "Okay," and off he went. "Please don't report us." He didn't see the plants. He didn't look for the plants, unlike Moses, who was in the fields shepherding. And he sees a burning bush. He was the one who last week, as you remember, was found floating in a basket in the Nile River, found by the Pharaoh's daughter, who took him into their court. And they named him Moses. And the word Moses, or the name Moses, means to be drawn out, to be drawn out. Moses is the main man in the Old Testament. God said, other prophets I have spoken through dreams and through visions, but for Moses, I have spoken to him face to face. He is in a category all by himself. He is the great liberator of the Hebrews from Egyptian slavery. Of course, when we meet him in our reading, Moses is on the lam. He's hiding out in the Arabian desert to beat a murder rap back in Egypt. He's not facing his past or who he really is or what he should be doing at that moment. And through many circumstances and situations, and yes, even mistakes, God began to draw out of Moses who he really is and all of his potential. And God used him. And Moses' life became great. And that is what the spiritual life is all about. God drawing out of us who we really are as we tap into strength and courage and wisdom and hope and love. The more you are around God, the more you can face your circumstances and the challenges that we have. God will draw out of you what God has put into you, and you'll have what you need to get through it. God is present in this instant, offering to partner with us in whatever we face, where we can be in touch with the world, but in tune with the Spirit. It's all about paying attention, which makes me think of Mrs. Smith. You don't know Mrs. Smith. She was called to serve on a jury, but asked to be excused because she says, I don't believe in capital punishment. The judge says, but madam, this isn't a murder trial. It is a civil suit. A woman is being sued by her former husband because he gambled away the $25,000 he promised to spend to remodel the bathroom for your birthday. Okay, I'll serve, Mrs. Smith said, and I've changed my mind about capital punishment. We need to be willing to see things differently and to change the way we think and pay attention for God on every page. Which brings us back to Moses again in his life and how he was changed one day when he turned aside, our text says. You see where it says that right there in the first reading? He turned aside. The bush required Moses to take a time out. He could have seen the flash out of the corner of his eye. Oh, how pretty, and kept right on shepherding. He didn't know that there was an angel in that bush. Everything hinged upon Moses being willing to turn aside, to interrupt his daily routine and pay attention to the presence of God, which is everywhere. He didn't have to. He could have looked the other way, as many of us do. He would have missed the Exodus, the people of Israel, his calling, the reason for his existence. He would have missed knowing God, but he didn't miss it. He stopped and he turned aside. He parked his sheep. He left the narrow path in order to take a closer look at this marvelous sight, and God noticed. Now, Christy found a praying mantis on a flower, on a plant the other day. I think it was a sunflower. Anyway, this long green bug, and its arms are bent in the form of a prayer. And it's about 4 inches long. They're really cool things, the creatures. And we knelt to take a closer look at this bug. And he knew that we were looking at him. And he slowly moved his green, glassy-eyed, Martian-looking head with his antennae. And he looked and he turned toward us. And it gave me a creep at first, but then I realized I'm communicating with this alien creature, this life of another form, and we all have the same creator in common. And it was a marvelous sight. I'm so glad we took the time to turn aside to do that. And then I gave him a piece of advice. Stay away from the chickens, I said. They're not quite as spiritual as we are. When Moses turned aside, God dismissed the angel and he took over the bush. And he called to him, Moses, Moses. And he answered, here I am. And before God asked Moses to do anything at all, God asked him to take off his shoes, not because the ground was hot, but because it was holy. And the rest is history. So the question is, does this happen to us? Do you and I walk on holy ground all the time? But are we moving so fast, with our faces maybe in our little screens, returning so many texts and emails, our minds preoccupied with other things and other places? We're not really paying attention, almost like we're walking zombies, like me in the grocery store at Meijer. Do we have such a long list of things to get done that we miss it? That we miss the presence of God? Earth is crammed with heaven, and every common bush afire with God. But only to he who sees, who takes off his shoes. The rest sit around and pluck blackberries. Paying attention requires no equipment, no special clothing, no green fees, no personal trainers. You don't even have to be in particularly good shape to pay attention. It's kind of like the ring in the movie The Lord of the Rings, where Gandalf, speaking for Jesus, says to Bilbo, it wants to be found. God wants to be found. Meister Eckhart, 14th century German theologian and mystic, wrote, God is like a person who clears his throat while hiding and so gives himself away. Mary Oliver, the 21st century Thoreau, wrote, this is the first, wildest, and widest thing I know, that the soul exists and that it is built entirely out of attentiveness. Jesus found God in all things, in the birds and the flowers and the seeds and the trees and the lakes, campfires and fish. He showed how we can experience God's Spirit in ways that are beyond and beneath language. And it is because of him that my eyes are open today. And this same God is ready to transform anyone who is willing to turn aside, to seek the sacred, and climb a mountain to do it. God will speak, and it will be holy. Amen.